that just do not make sense. Like why there's so few believers on the firing line, while so many others sit the fence. But if you want to know where the Word of God stands, and believe it wants to use your feet and hands, it's time to take your faith out of the seats and into the streets, and come along with me. If you only look, then you will see on WCN-TV.
All right, I don't know whether to just say good morning or good afternoon. This is a recorded version of Wisconsin Christian News Television Live, which we normally live stream in the afternoon on Wednesdays, but today we're recording it in the morning, so I'm all bollocksed up this morning. Welcome to Wisconsin Christian News Television. My name is Michael Heath, and I am a co-host now. I guess I stood in for Rob in August and helped him out with a number of shows, and I guess I didn't scare him off, so he asked me to take a couple of shows per month. We produce Wisconsin Christian News Television Live once a week for an hour, and I'm doing 2 shows a month. And Rob Pugh, the publisher of Wisconsin Christian News, is producing 2 shows per month. I want to get in the habit of starting the show when I do it with some scripture. So I have had my son Jared, who produces the show, pull up Psalm 1. And I think one of the reasons America is in so much trouble is because Christianity has muted itself in the past century, particularly. Did you know that the politicians, when they would get things rolling after they got elected, up until 1900, would invite clergy into the halls of power to deliver sermons? And I wouldn't be surprised if some of those election day sermons, they were called, didn't have as their text Psalm 1, the very first psalm in that famous book from the Bible, Psalms. So we're going to start today's show with Psalm 1, and you want to stay tuned. Don't go away, as this is not a very long psalm, so you're not going to get bored, but I promise you won't get bored with our guest today. It's Brian Camenker, who is a phenomenal, perhaps the best in the world, and I'm not kidding, leader on how to respond effectively to the challenge being posed to Western culture, particularly, but now, of course, globally, by the so-called LGBTQ issue. There's nobody on planet Earth who has done more good on this issue, in my humble opinion, than our guest today. His name is Brian Camenker. I'm going to introduce you to him after I finish reading this psalm. He's the leader of MassResistance. We'll be showing you his website, and we'll be talking with you about how you can help him win this fight. And we are going to win that battle. We are going to win. Psalm 1, blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. Did you know that there are such a thing as sinners, right? Did you know that there are such a thing as scornful people? Not, we Christians have gotten into this mode of thinking that everybody, that under that veneer of disquiet or whatever. Everybody's a nice person. Well, it's not true. There's a lot of scornful people in the world. There's a lot of sinners in the world, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate day and night. And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that bringeth forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper. The ungodly are not so, but are like the chaff which the wind driveth away. Therefore the ungodly shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knoweth the way of the righteous, but the way of the ungodly shall perish. Jared, scroll back up there a little bit to verse 2. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate day and night. There's some men and women in Montana who honor the law by carrying their guns in public, and they did so recently. And Brian Camenker, throw up that website, Jared, MassResistanceorg, MassResistance.org. My name's Mike Heath. This is Wisconsin Christian News Television Live, and this is Brian Camenker's website. We just read Psalm 2. It talks about how important it is for people to delight in law, in law, just law in general. Now, the Psalm was talking about God's law, but we have laws in America, and law is a good thing, and we're supposed to meditate on it. We're supposed to honor it. And these men pictured here, scroll down just a little bit, found out that Black Lives Matter was organizing in their little Montana town. And so realizing that one of the favorite things for Black Lives Matter is to tear statues down, they decided that their Veterans Memorial in their little town in Montana was at risk. And so they didn't just go into their prayer closet and think everything was going to work out because they maybe prayed Psalm 1 out loud in the privacy of their church or their stained glass fortress. No, they they holstered up their gun and they got onto the streets and they surrounded the monument. And guess what? The hundreds of people who showed up thinking that America has become this racist, hate-filled country were forced by the presence of those firearms to be peaceful. Brian Camenker, did I get that wrong?
No, you got it right.
Do you think those guns do you think those guns helped make the peace that day?
I think it had a big, yeah, absolutely. And that's the way America was intended to be. You know, the Second Amendment is the Second Amendment. And unfortunately, many of the states have gone against the Second Amendment. But if that were being done around the country, we'd have a lot less trouble. That's for sure.
Man, Brian, I am so agitated in my spirit by how weak the response of law enforcement has been this entire year. I don't understand. I mean, I do understand it, right? Because things are so wicked this year. But how all these people that want to be violent and burn stuff down and tear statues down, they get away with it. And the police officers, the people that we think are there, and we pay big money, big salaries for them to be on the job every day, they're not doing anything about it. What?
Well, it shouldn't be too surprising, because the police, the police have a long history of being on the side of the left. We've certainly seen that in Massachusetts for at least a decade and a half of our own activism, where going back a long time, the left will come and take over a street and harass a church or harass mostly churches, and the cops will let them do it. They don't have to get a permit. They don't have to get anything. But if conservatives want to protest or anything, they got to get a permit. They got to stay on the sidewalk, or they have to be herded into a free speech zone, over and over and over again. You know, the left has the ability to go and disrupt an event put on by conservatives, and the cops will be right there and let them do it. I mean, we have video of that.
Brian, you're no stranger to this. I jumped ahead of myself, but I don't regret it, because what I want you viewers and listeners to learn today is why we're losing, and why we've lost so much ground. Brian has been on the front lines of this fight for closing in on 40 years, right, Brian? I mean, over 30 anyway, right? And we don't like to admit that, right?
Well, it's closing in on 30. Yeah. I first got involved in late 1992, when my kids were in elementary school, I guess first grade, and they started pushing this in my kids' elementary school, and I got involved then.
1982.
Not 92.
1992. And you got involved because it affected you personally there in Massachusetts.
Right, in my own kids' school. And before long, we had a citywide parents group, and that, you know, the following year we ran school committee candidates in all 8 wards of that city, and oh boy, the other side hated us. And I mean, that's a whole interesting story by itself, but that's
sure.
really how I got involved. And it spread from being a local parents group to a statewide group to a national and international group.
So Brian, when so your kids were introduced to these wretched concepts related to human sexuality, and you responded by going public and resisting it. You didn't just go into the school and meet with the sex ed teacher and have the sex ed teacher give you their explanation that, of course, you should just take on face value. You decided to become confrontational, not confrontational, but you decided to be public, and you got all kinds of pushback. 99 out of 100 people like you, I think, since 1992 have maybe had a similar meeting, maybe had similar concerns, and the minute they got the pushback or they got the explanation from the sex ed teacher, they just went away and they didn't do anything. Why did you do something?
Well, I guess I'm a stubborn guy. You know?
Well, having slept on the floor of your office for more than one night, I can, gotten to know you pretty well. You are a stubborn guy, but you're nice about it. You're nice about it.
You know, I just wasn't going to take, I wasn't going to take no for an answer on this, and oh man, the other side was just vicious from the very beginning. And I just wasn't in the mood for backing down. And what we found was a lot of people who normally would have just backed down or, been afraid, once they saw one or two or more people, one person doing it and more people doing it, we got a pretty big parents group there of people that normally would have been completely afraid. And so what we found is that when people see somebody doing something, they're often attracted to it. But they unfortunately, if people aren't doing anything, or if the leaders are bad, the whole thing falls apart.
Republicans, of course, are always great, solid, hard-hitting, pro-family leaders, aren't they? We can be thankful. We can be thankful for our Republican leadership going back 30 years, right? I'm sure that's been your experience.
Well, in the beginning, we did get a lot of a lot of support from local Republicans. Were the same thing to happen today, we would get none. So things have gotten considerably worse. One of the things that I found is, 2 years later, we put a bill before the legislature on parental notification, and it was a huge battle on that. And we ended up getting it passed by both houses and signed by the governor, who didn't want to sign it. And the houses really didn't want to vote for it. It was the pressure from people, but we got actually more help from conservative Democrats than we did from Republicans. There actually were conservative Democrats back then, by the way, which I don't know if there are anymore.
Yeah, things have really gotten worse, haven't they? Especially on the issue that drew you out into politics was sex education. And then you and I have worked closely together, more specifically on the so-called LGBT issue, the issue of homosexuality and homosexual rights. And we've seen it get to the point now where, of course, Donald Trump supports homosexuality and is pushing it globally. And the Republican Party has been weak on the issue from the beginning. I never got institutional support in Maine when I was fighting it from either of the political parties, not officially. The only thing I could get out of Republicans was an occasional vote, but they would do nothing to support us. So it's gotten a lot worse. And
it's funny. Exactly 20 years ago, in 2000, we brought Alan Keyes to the Massachusetts State House, and we had the great hall of the Massachusetts State House filled with people, and he gave this barn burner of a speech on the homosexual issue in the schools. And right next to me speaking, when who I think he also spoke, was the Republican minority leader.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and so that would never ever happen today. Now, of course, what we did is we led a march to the governor's office, who was a Republican, Paul Cellucci, who was basically pushing for funding for all of this stuff. So there was sort of a rift between this, left-wing Republican governor who was 100% pro-LGBT and the rank and file that weren't. Today, it's terrible. You're right. I mean, I would get no support in the State House from Republicans at all, and it's just gotten terrible. There might be one or two state legislators that would vote our way, but
yeah. Lest everybody just walk away hopeless at this point, shaking your head. The reason I'm doing this show and interviewing Brian is because, number one, he, in the face of this in Massachusetts, hasn't quit. In fact, Brian, you're more dedicated to this cause today than you were when you started, I would guess, even though all you've done, it seems, is at least in terms of the big picture, is lost ground. But that would not be accurate, because while this has been happening to you close to home in Massachusetts, mass resistance has become an international sort of source of inspiration. I mean, around the globe. That's no exaggeration. You've been turned to by other countries. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, let me just back up a second. Despite the lack of support in the Massachusetts legislature, we've had an amazing amount of success stopping things, stopping LGBT legislation by just, the force of, this sort of brute force of angry people confronting their state legislators. We've gotten a lot of bad stuff stopped.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the, the times when they've been successful, they've had to put an enormous amount of money and energy to overcome us. And so, it's possible even in the worst places to stop bad things. We've stopped bad things in California, and their legislature is far worse than ours. But anyway, moving on internationally, yeah, we have chapters across the country, basically from California all the way across. In fact, we have had chapters in Hawaii and Maine, which we may resurrect, but we have them. We've had them in Alaska and just everywhere. We have chapters in Canada, in the UK, in Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, Nigeria, Australia. I'm trying to remember. Maybe I'm forgetting some.
You and one of the things that you bring to the table for folks who want to confront this issue is a tremendous depth of resources. The best place to start to get educated and encouraged and inspired is at MassResistanceorg. Tell us, you've been producing this website from the beginning. I should say my son's computer company hosts your website because multiple times you've been thrown off the internet. I mean, you're like worse than what your Facebook's worst nightmare. I mean, you get censored at the level of the ISP, the Internet Service Provider.
Yeah. And, I mean, if it wasn't for you guys, I don't know what we do. But this website, Brian, I just love your website because it literally goes back 30 years with all the great writing that you've done. You're one of the best. And I don't mean this in a pejorative way. I mean it in the best possible way. You're one of the best propagandists for our movement, if not the best propagandist in writing for our movement in the world. And thank you.
I would defy anyone who spends any bit of time on your website to prove me wrong on that point. And the content that you've produced goes back. Does it go back 30 years? I know it goes back decades, right?
I think it goes back almost, at least 25 years, probably longer. One of the things that's helped me in writing, and I appreciate your kind words, is I had a career as a newspaper reporter, and it was far, in a small town newspaper in the South, and what that does to you, if you have to write every single day for a newspaper, you have to make complicated things simple enough that regular people can read them and understand them. And that's something missing a lot in today's world, in a lot of conservative writing, especially.
Well, and I think that's especially true on this LGBT issue, because the first thing you encounter, it seems to me, is this temptation to not make it overly offensive, right? To not offend, because the left has been so good with that particular issue in getting good people to feel guilty. And you've developed a narrative style in your writing which cannot in any way, shape, or form be proven to be hateful. It doesn't come off. I mean, unlike me, who I just can't stop myself from straying over the rhetorical line into the use of occasionally offensive descriptions of what they do and of who they are. When I say they, I mean this whole LGBT movement. You've stayed kind of journalistic in how you do it, but very effective. And I'm always inspired when I read.
Thank you. I feel that it's very important to tell the truth, And when I say that, I mean not withholding the truth, because too many people on our side will tell the truth, but not the whole truth.
There you go.
And yeah, I may say it in a way that's, less inflammatory or flamboyant than other people might, and sometimes not. But I don't want to not say it. It still must be said.
Yes.
And
I've always appreciated that about you. And you've we've got 5 minutes before the break here. The one point, Brian, I want to drive home during this hour for our viewers and our listeners is something you and I have talked about a lot over the years. And that is and maybe you can whet our appetite for what we'll talk about when we come back from the break. And that is this virus that we've had especially on this issue of homosexuality, to always be nice, always be
right.
Always.
Yeah, that is the wrong approach. And
nobody will say that, right? Nobody will say that. You've been saying that to me for 30 years. That's the wrong. Your belief is that that's the wrong political approach, and most of people on our side don't agree. It seems like, or if they agree with you on it, they don't act like they agree with you.
Well, I've been doing this long enough to have done everything wrong, and finally stumbled on the right stuff. And so when I say being nice isn't the right thing to do, I don't do that from an ideological point of view. I do it from a practical point of view. It doesn't work. In fact, it only makes things worse. And that's the problem. I mean, if we're out to make ourselves feel good, well, then be nice. But if we're out to win the battle, you have to do what wins. And
but that's not a new idea for you, Brian. How did you come to that conclusion?
Well, I mean, I guess I came to it by, as I said, doing things wrong for a while, and finally stumbling on the fact that if you tell the truth and you tell it boldly, you get tremendous. It works. I think we learned that in 1995 when we got the parental notification law passed by the Massachusetts legislature that absolutely didn't want to pass it. We just told the truth. We said, no, you're not going to do this. You're not going to push this perversion on our kids. And we had these this whole sea of mothers with little kids descending on the State House to say that. And it worked. It's still law. Chapter 71, Section 32A hasn't been repealed yet.
So, folks, we are not without hope. We are talking here on today's show with the man who's done it for the past 30 years. And the only reason that they've lost ground in Massachusetts during that same period of time is because those who should know better in politics, and I'm speaking very specifically about the Republican Party, have decided to play games on this issue. And we're going to talk more about that when we come back from the break, about some of the games that these Republicans play, and get advice from Brian about how you can confront that, or how you can see it before it happens, and how you can, because folks, we are going to win this battle, but it's not going to be the Republicans who win it for us. It's going to be you who wins this battle. It's going to be you, Mom. It's going to be you, Dad, who educates yourself and says, enough of this communism, enough of this stealing of our country, this theft that we're witnessing right now at the national level in this presidential race. Enough. And if you give yourself permission you're going to have to give yourself permission to get angry, to get in touch with your accurate emotions regarding what's being done to your children and to your grandchildren. And you're going to have to find in wisdom a way to communicate that anger. That's what we're going to talk more about when we come back from the break, because Brian he can provide the most practical advice on how you can do that as we move forward here to save our nation. And we are going to save it. Donald Trump's going to remain president for another 4 years, but even if that works out, and I think it will, he's going to be gone in 4 years. And there's more than 4 years worth of work that needs to be done, especially on this issue. So stay tuned. Don't go away. When we come back, more with Brian Camenker from Mass Resistance.
Have you been looking for a trusted long-term storable food company? We have a solution for you. Simply Clean Foods is dedicated to providing the best quality food you can buy next to fresh from a farmer's market. Our line of resealable fruits, vegetables, and meats are suitable for everyday use, and you won't have to worry about throwing away valuable groceries ever again. Our food is completely GMO-free, and our stringent quality controls, plus testing for heavy metals, makes us unique in the storable foods market. Simply Clean Foods' primary focus is to bring clean food to people all around the world and change the way we look at freeze-dried food in our daily cooking. When you purchase from simplycleanfoods.net, not only will you be receiving high-quality food, but you will also be supporting veterans in need across the country and those who are affected by natural disasters. Right now, Amazon Prime members will receive fast 2-day shipping. Go to simplycleanfoods.net. That's simplycleanfoods.net. But do it today.
At the McClario firm, it all starts with family. We are here to serve you and your family, online or in person. Call today for a free consultation. The McClario firm, your law firm for life.
Pornography is a destructive force. It destroys individuals, families, and fuels the out-of-control demand for sex trafficking. 45% of Christian families say porn is a problem in their home, but why aren't churches and public schools talking about this? Fear. People who view porn think they're the only one. It's a lie. Statistically, more people view porn than who do not and struggle in silence. www.lynnfrederick.com. You can find the book I wrote about my own battle with porn and the presentations that I do for churches and public schools. lynnfrederick.com.
All right, you're back with Wisconsin Christian News Television live stream only. We're not live this time. We're recording, but it will be broadcast live at our normal time on WCN-TV.net and also on YouTube for now. There's no doubt YouTube. It's becoming so old hat now, the whole censorship issue of Christians, that it's almost like, why talk about it? People are going to have to, if they want to get accurate, truthful information, you're going to have to get off of YouTube. You're going to have to get off of Facebook. You're going to have to get off of Twitter. I think what's going to happen, we're not going to get into this today, but I am going to do a show, at least I'm going to do some shows on this in the future. We're going to have to get creative like my guest, Brian Camenker, who has been producing a website since before the internet was invented. That's not true, but close, right?
Pretty close, yeah, pretty close. I mean, I remember the first one we had. Oh man.
But one of the things that Jared, my son Jared, and I get a kick out of with your website is it's a very, everybody's using really complicated platform websites now with WordPress, or there's 3 of them: Joomla, WordPress, Joomla, and there's one other one I can't remember. Drupal, yeah, and you're still just hammering away on HTML code. Your website is just the bare bones, gets the job done, and it does.
You know, I also had a career as a programmer, and you know, I mean, I know this is sort of off the subject, but HTML and CSS are really, you can do a lot with them. And if you just hand your website over to some third party, first of all, you're you're introducing whatever bugs and hack things that they have, but you give up a certain amount of control.
Mm-hmm.
And the downside is coding is it's a little difficult, unfortunately,
right.
But you can do it.
And the other thing you introduce when you go to these more complex platforms than what you do is if you run into trouble like you have. I mean, you get up one morning and you go and you go to the office and you turn on your website and it's gone, right?
Yeah.
It just disappeared without any warning. Your website is what we call, I guess, flat, right? It's not a huge website because it's very simple. It keeps its pictures small and the code is very elegant and simple. And so your website is not huge, even though it goes back 30 years, it's not huge, right? So bringing it back when you end up being hammered by the left, like you've been at least twice that I know of, you've been taken off by at least 2 internet service providers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And most people haven't experienced that. They're experiencing the censorship with Facebook and Google and whatever, but you've experienced it at the internet service provider level. Talk with us a little bit about that. I don't want to go. We could do 2 or 3 shows on that.
Well, yeah. I mean, another thing, by the way, is somebody could go and completely destroy our website online, and we could have it back up in 10 minutes, which is not. It's not quite that easy at all with other things. But
that's right.
Yeah, I mean, homosexual activists basically, approached 2 different, web providers and said, "Oh, you have this hate group on," or blah blah blah, and they just booted us.
Yeah.
And right away.
One of them was a Christian ISP. So dear Christian person who trusts your pastor, your priest, and thinks that you're getting the straight stuff from the straight stuff from them. This was a Christian ISP, the first one that booted you without warning. Isn't that right?
I'm trying to remember. I think it was, but
I know it was because I remember I was there. I remember.
Okay, yeah. And they don't. These companies don't let you give your side of the story at all. Oh, the gays don't like you and call you names, so they must be right. You're off.
Mm-hmm.
And that happens all over the country now to conservatives. I mean, it happened to us early on,
and I think you provide the example, Brian, through how you've managed leadership of your nonprofit. This is what any politician that you talk to, listener or viewer, this is what they have got to commit to, is to be like Brian on this issue. And what does that mean? That doesn't mean they go out and harangue and beat up on sinners. And that's not what you've done for 30 years, but you've been effective in, like you say, stopping some bad stuff. But if we're going to win on this issue, we got to start winning some good stuff. We've got to go on offense, which is what I want to talk about now, which is how I want to end the show. Brian, you and I have talked about this many times. We lack an offense. You've shown that we can even now, and we've been able to be somewhat effective on defense, stopping stuff. It's rare, right? I mean, they've won more by being on offense than we've won by being on defense.
You're absolutely right. Absolutely, yeah.
You've been able to win a few on defense, but there's never been an offense. You've never been successful in building or creating an offense. Talk with us about that.
Well, we have a few times, but the conservative movement just doesn't go there. I mean, one of the things that, first of all, we're different in a few ways. One is we are not a ministry. I would say that just about everybody that I know of involved with our organization is religious. And if they haven't been, they become that way just because dealing with this stuff brings you closer to God. But we are not a ministry, so we are not trying to save people's souls or, all of that. And we are an activist organization. And we also don't name ourselves a positive name. There's everybody wants to be, oh, well, we're the, this, for the family and all of that. We're not out to make the family better. We're out to stop the people who are trying to destroy our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, that's something that I think you have to understand from the beginning, is what you're out to do. All of these, so-called pro-family organizations are immediately on defense because that's the nature of their group, and they don't want to have a negative sounding name. Well, the only reason we're not here to make the family stronger. That's, other people can do that. We're here to stop the people who are who are going after children and destroying their lives and destroying America.
That is so well said, Brian. My experience in Maine was that when I was a Christian leader, I was publicly known leader of the Christian Civic League of Maine, but my narrative in the 90s, when we were winning, was very much rooted in discussing in very simple terms the reality, the moral realities related to homosexuality. And what I concluded very early is that it's a very simple formula when we're talking about that issue, or any matter related to sex outside of marriage, and in that it's from a legal perspective, it's not a good thing. And what we ought to be discussing is not whether or not it's a good thing, but what the penalties ought to be for something that isn't in nature a good thing. And that was my narrative for all those years. And we were winning, but then Focus on the Family came in with their Love One Out program, and they destroyed everything we'd built up there politically. We were headed in a winning direction. We were actually winning major public populist contests, statewide votes on ballots more than once. And nobody at the time was doing that. And you've told me more than once that was the case, that we were actually taking the fight to them and winning. And but then Focus on the Family, because they're pulled by the point, to illustrate the point you're making, they were pulled by their mission statement to this Love One Out narrative, to this we got to be nice to them thing. And they had the best of intentions, Brian. But I watched all of our muscle. I watched all of our muscle, the muscle in our movement. I just watched it shrivel up. And
right. Yeah, I mean, and that approach doesn't really help the homosexuals themselves. I mean, they're tragic people. They're in many ways tortured inside themselves, and they need help. And saying, well, we're just going to love you and let you do what you do or whatever, that doesn't help them.
Right. Or even worse, take the message, take people who were formerly homosexual, put them in front of a bunch of Christians, and rather than spend that valuable time talking about how we're going to stop this political movement, spend all of those hours sort of persuading them to understand the plight of the sexual.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
It's not that it's a bad thing, right? I mean, we do want to understand, we do want to have compassion, we do want to care. But when we're talking about a political campaign ontologically, in its essence, comes down to winning or losing.
Right. It simply doesn't work. Now, I also want to say that even though we're not a ministry, we still think that God should be part of the argument. And a lot of ministries themselves don't want to do that.
Isn't that interesting?
They even though they're based in that, they don't want to say, well, this is bad because it's immoral and it's against God's law. We find that all the time. But it is immoral and it is against God's law.
And you've always said that, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and there are other reasons too why it's bad. You know,
Right.
there's health reasons and everything else.
Yep.
But
Which, by the way, you've literally written the book on the health
right,
reasons.
yeah.
And I do want to digress here. Bring up that book, Jared. Folks, this is Amazon threw this book off of Amazon. So I guess you're not going to find it on Amazon, probably.
No, unfortunately, we'll see.
Jared's looking for it on Amazon.
It's not, if you go to the bottom of our webpage, and yeah, I think there's another link that goes to our
it's right
page
there, Jared. Health hazards of homosexuality, I think.
Yeah.
Jared, put it up on the screen, folks.
Yeah, I mean, Amazon for 3.5 years sold it, and they knew exactly what it said because we worked closely with them when we were publishing it, because there were all these, you know, it's a 600-page book with all of this, you know, intricate kinds of formatting, and so we had to work closely with them on it. They knew exactly what it was, but once you know, they started getting pressure from the left, that was it. It's against our, you know, our, whatever they call it, terms of service or whatever stupidity they call it.
And this book, Brian, is not. I haven't read it all yet, but I started reading through it. I mean, but folks, this is dry bone stuff. This is stats and research and science, and a lot of it's taken from government sources, CDC.
Yeah, it's just about. It's largely taken from the CDC and other medical, you know, medical sources. That's basically what we did. We even went to the LGBT medical sources. I mean, they are surprisingly honest about what the behavior does.
Right.
And you know, and that's what it is. It's a compilation of all this stuff in a way that people can read it and understand it. And it's, you know, fully footnoted. The gay activists.
Brian, you're in Boston, Massachusetts. You are at ground zero for the American intellectual enterprise. Harvard, Yale. I mean, you could, you know, just start running.
I know.
They're all right there, and they're the institutions that have a duty before God and man to produce this book. They should have been the ones to write this.
And it's only gotten worse. I mean, I have a friend who is a patient at Mass General Hospital, and now if you go to your you know, want to go have an appointment for a checkup or something, you have to fill out a form where they ask you what your gender identity is and your sexual orientation, and they give you a list of choices. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, it's like it's insanity. It's quackery. It's like junk science. So that's how far it's gotten. But you know, as much as the gays hate this book, they've never been able to claim that it's wrong. They just claim that it's hateful. You know,
they just do it. They just respond to this in the way that the left is responding to all of us now.
Right. And
all,
you know, I know. My favorite was in 2017, where President Trump got connected to it, because we had a table at the Values Voters Conference, you know, that they have in Washington, and we had a table there. And one day, you know, this was right after the election, the president came and spoke, and so naturally, NBC and Newsweek and all of that connected our book to the president. You know, Donald Trump, you know, speaks at an organization with hateful anti-gay book.
Yeah, look at that title. It's so obvious it's hateful. Health homosexuality. Everybody knows there's no health hazards to sodomy, Brian. Come on.
Oh, it's like it's so overwhelming, the health hazards, that it's just amazing that anybody, you know.
How could we, Brian, having so much truth on our side in these decades, in these decades that you and I have stood together on the front lines fighting this issue, how could we manage to lose with so much truth on our side?
Well, I will tell you, one of the things is the other side. I mean, there's a whole list of reasons. One is that the other side, the left, lives and breathes activism and organizing and pushing a false narrative, and our side doesn't. Our side doesn't. If you take the average conservative and hold a gun to his head and say, "I want you to help organize people, or else I'll shoot you," he'll say, "Pull the trigger." You know, they just don't want to do it. Instead, the conservative movement is this big echo chamber of everybody, blogging and writing intellectual articles and holding conferences and doing all of this stuff that doesn't accomplish anything.
It doesn't accomplish anything, but it costs tens of millions of dollars every year.
This is the other thing, and this is something that's been going on for probably 70 years, is that the left gets an enormous amount of money to be, their front lines. But the conservatives, big conservative donors, do not want to fund activism. They want to fund the mainstream, the Heritage Foundation and all that other stuff. And so, as you found out when you were running the Christian Civic League of Maine, and everybody else has found out that fights this, there's almost no money to do it because the conservative donors don't want to go there, and
right,
for a number of reasons.
That's right. On this issue, folks,
yeah,
on this issue, folks, if you want to get in the game and you are making money, part of the plan, part of the strategy, you're in trouble before you get started. Right?
If I literally, if I wanted to start a pro-gay activist group that went into the schools to push this, the amount of money that I could get within a week or two is just unbelievable. They advertise it. They are pushing to do that. But if you want to do the opposite, it's just it's horrible. And so you really, that's a big reason. There's just, the disparity in funding.
Folks, listen to me. That's not a reason not to do the right thing, right? The fact that you can't raise the money, the fact that the rich people are not on your side. Brian is a living, breathing example that you can make a difference without having Donald Trump on your side, without having Richie Rich, the billionaire, pick your local billionaire, on your side. You don't need their support in order to win this, right, Brian?
Yeah. The way you get around it, of course, is by having lots of just regular people chip in.
Yeah.
And that's what you have to do. And there are lots and lots of people that love what people like us do. And so that's how you do it. You have to just develop a different base. But,
right.
If these
but
groups
Brian, the first step to that, right? If you're an organizer, if you're new to this, if you're a Christian, okay, if you're a dad, Brian was, and you've never dealt with this issue, the first thing you have to overcome, the first thing you have to confront is yourself and your fear, right? You're going to be rejected. Just plan on it. And right. And
I used to have people show, my friends in my neighborhood ask me how come they haven't burned down my house.
Right.
I mean, and they were not joking. They were going, how have you avoided that? And the truth is if you stand up to them like we did, and I don't want to sound pompous or anything here, but it's an amazing psychological effect. If you stand up to them, they're like classic bullies. They will back down. But if you project fear, they will grind you into the ground. My phone number was in the phone book for years, and I might get one bad call every 2 or 3 years, and I'd call them back.
Yeah.
Other people who projected fear would have to keep changing their phone numbers because of all the the harassing calls they get. And yeah, you're right. You cannot be afraid of this, but because
Well,
that's what they want.
it's like where we started the show, Brian, with that excellent article you wrote. Throw that up again, Jared, from Montana. Those men didn't project fear. It's like Kyle Rittenhouse. Kyle Rittenhouse's story is going to end up being one of the most inspirational and important incidents of 2020, because here was a boy 17 years old who had it figured out. His headspace was where it needed to be in every way, and he had an AR-15 hanging around his neck.
How was that?
But yet, what the reason he was there was because he was carrying a medical bag and a eraser, and his mission, his purpose, was to go and help the businessmen clean up the graffiti, and he was there to help with his medical bag because he knew how to provide medical care in an emergency situation. He'd been trained to do that, and he was there, and the gun was to project force. Now, unfortunately, Kyle ended up in a situation where he had to actually use the gun, and he ended up killing 2 men. But those men deserved what they got. They deserved it.
Yeah.
And Kyle had the whole package when he went to Kenosha that night. He was fearless, and he was carrying the tool that he needed in order to project that fearlessness. And this is what happens, folks. We have been so fearful on these simple questions, like the question of sodomy, that we have earned what we're getting right now.
Yeah.
Right, Brian?
And one other factor in all of this is the other side has this false narrative that they just pound and pound and pound, and our people are afraid to say the opposite. And they really are afraid to say the opposite, and I've seen that up and down the conservative line. And we've got to stop being afraid to say the opposite.
I couldn't agree more. I have felt that fear, Brian, and all too often I have given into it. You're in a public hearing, you're wherever you are, and the moment arrives, and you've got to take that stand in flesh and blood. And the pressure, the force has grown so oppressive over the last half century or so on these sexual morality related issues that it does take a very clear head. It takes real courage to say the truth.
Right. I want to add this before we leave, is there's a great joy and power in telling the truth. There's just this wonderful feeling that the other side can never have because they don't tell the truth. They're always lying.
Amen.
The truth has a power of itself, and if you're willing to harness it, great things can happen.
Amen. And you've lived that, even though it looks like you have lost everything. Like you said earlier in the show, you've actually been able to slow some stuff down or actually stop some stuff by being fearless. And folks, we need to confront this fear that exists in all of our hearts and minds, and we need to overcome it. If we don't do it, if we don't do that right now, you don't have any more time. There's no more time to pretend that this is going to go away or that somebody else is going to fix it. We don't have any more time. We don't have that luxury anymore. Either you are going to fix it, or America could very quickly fall into socialism, if not communism. Very quickly. It could. I don't think it will be quick, but if you don't change your ways and your thinking and your speech on this issue in particular, then yeah, that's where we're headed. Brian, I'll give you the last word. MassResistanceorg. You are a nonprofit. You exist because people donate to you. If you're listening to me today, if you're viewing this live stream, you need to donate to MassResistanceorg. Go
Thank
ahead,
you,
Brian.
Mike. Yeah, thank you very much. That's how we live, is through donations, and people around the world donate. It's amazing how many, the number of, like places like Singapore. You'd be surprised at how many people from there are like monthly donors.
That's awesome. That's great. So I'm going to have you. Would you come back on the show with me? I want to do another show with you.
Sure.
At least one more show. Good. So if you've been tuning in to WCN-TV Live, you've been given a real treat today, a morsel that you can eat. I know you can't. You won't share it on Facebook because you're afraid they'll ban you. But you know what? You should share it on Facebook. And if they ban you, good. You'll feel better about yourself for doing it. So share this on YouTube, wherever, whatever your favorite social media poison is. Get this around to friends and family because it'll encourage them to do the right thing. And we got to start doing the right thing if we hope to save our nation. So Brian Camenker, thank you for being on the show. Tune in next week when I don't know who's going to be on. I should have checked that out beforehand. But check out the website, WCN-TV.net, and you can find out who our guest is going to be for next week. God bless you.
Thank you.